It was April, the gentle heart of spring. The chill of winter had faded into memory, and the countryside around London was coming alive again. Buds unfurled on the trees, rivers murmured with renewed vigor, and the soft air carried the perfume of wildflowers. Fields glimmered with dew in the morning light, and the song of larks filled the open sky. It was a time when life seemed to stretch and breathe once more, and with it, men and women longed for renewal of the spirit. In those days, one of the most cherished acts of devotion was the pilgrimage, a holy journey taken not only by the devout, but by common folk of every kind. People walked long miles to the shrines of saints, seeking forgiveness, blessings, or a miracle to heal their souls. And of all the holy destinations in England, none was more famous than the road to Canterbury, where the shrine of St. Thomas Becket stood, glittering with gold and legend. The story begins not upon that road, but within a warm and bustling inn on the southern edge of London, the Tabard Inn in Southwark. It was a lively place where travellers rested before venturing onward. That evening, the common room was filled with light and laughter. A fire blazed in the hearth, casting a soft glow upon faces flushed from wine and cheer. Wooden cups clinked, and the scent of roasted meat hung in the air. Around the table sat a gathering of 29 pilgrims, all bound for Canterbury come the dawn. They were strangers brought together by faith and fortune, nobles and merchants, scholars and peasants, clerics and craftsmen. Dust clung to their boots, and the weariness of travel mingled with the excitement of what lay ahead. Though they differed in rank, speech and manner, for that one night they were united as fellow travelers. Bound for the same holy goal, among them sat the knight, a man of calm dignity, his tunic still stained by armor worn in battle. His face was weathered but noble, his voice gentle, his eyes kind. Beside him was his son, the squire, handsome and full of youthful charm, his bright embroidered clothes marking him as one who loved poetry and song almost as much as chivalry. The yeoman, a sturdy man dressed in green, sat close by, his bow and arrows ready, a symbol of his vigilance and service. Across the room, the prioress, known as Madame Eglantine, dined with refined manners, smiling softly as she fed bits of bread to her little dogs. Her rosary glimmered with green beads, and her voice when she spoke was sweet and measured. Nearby, the monk, broad of chest and ruddy of face, laughed heartily. His fine robes and golden pin betrayed his fondness for worldly pleasures. The friar, smooth and merry, whispered jokes to a group of merchants, his eyes always searching for generosity or weakness. There was also a merchant in stately clothes, proud and shrewd, who spoke of profits and trade winds. A clerk from Oxford, thin and humble, sat quietly reading a book by candlelight, his mind more alive with ideas than with food or coin. The sergeant of law, learned and precise, never wasted a word. The franklin, with his white beard and jovial face, laughed over his wine, a man of open heart and good appetite. A group of guildsmen, a haberdasher, a carpenter, a weaver, a dyer, and a tapestry maker, sat proudly together, their clothes clean and bright, symbols of the success their trades had brought. Their cook, a man skilled with spices and sauces, tended to the meal, though a sore on his leg hinted at imperfection even in talent. At another table sat the shipman, his skin tanned by years of sun and sea, his sharp eyes restless as the waves. The doctor, dressed in scarlet and blue, spoke knowingly of humours and herbs, though his talk often turned toward gold. The wife of Bath, bold and worldly, wore a broad hat and scarlet stockings. Her laugh was loud, her wit sharper still. She had been married 5 times and carried herself like a woman who feared neither man nor judgment. Not far from her sat the parson, humble and sincere, his worn clothes marking him as a man who lived by faith, not fortune. His brother, the ploughman, strong and honest, sat beside him, his hands calloused from tilling the earth. The miller, large and rough, boasted loudly, his red beard and wide grin giving him the look of a bear in good humour. The manciple, clever and quick, chuckled quietly, knowing he could outwit men twice as educated as he. The reeve, thin and severe, watched them all with a calculating gaze. At the far end of the room, the summoner, his face marred by red blotches, drank heavily, while beside him, the pardoner, smooth-faced and cunning, displayed his bag of so-called holy relics, a pillowcase he swore was Our Lady's veil, and a pig's bone sold as a saint's. Presiding over them all was the host, Harry Bailey, a large, cheerful man with twinkling eyes and a voice full of good humour. He welcomed the travellers warmly, serving food and laughter in equal measure. His presence filled the room like sunlight. As the night deepened, talk turned to the journey ahead. Some spoke with devotion, others with curiosity, and a few with the secret hope of adventure. The knight gave thanks for surviving many wars and wished to offer prayers of peace. The wife of Bath, with a knowing smile, declared she was travelling for love, though what sort of love she meant no one could quite say. The parson spoke softly of salvation, while the miller bellowed that he cared only for good ale and good company. At last, the host stood, raising his hand for silence. "Good friends," he said, his voice carrying above the laughter, "we have before us a long road and many days' ride. Let us not waste the hours in dull silence. Let us make this pilgrimage a joyful one. I propose a game, a contest of tales." The pilgrims leaned forward, their curiosity sparked. The host's eyes gleamed. "Each of you shall tell 2 tales on the way to Canterbury, and 2 on the way home. They may be of love, of adventure, of virtue, or vice, so long as they entertain and instruct. And when we return, I shall be the judge. The teller of the best tale shall win a supper at this very inn, paid for by all the rest." Laughter erupted. The knight nodded approvingly, and even the friar raised his mug in agreement. The wife of Bath winked, promising she would not lose. "But who shall begin?" "Ask the clerk." "To make it fair," the host replied, "we shall draw lots. Whoever draws the shortest straw will tell the first tale." A hush fell over the room as the host held out a handful of straws. One by one, the pilgrims drew. When it came time for the knight, he reached out calmly, and by chance, or perhaps by fate, his straw was the shortest. A murmur of approval spread through the room. The knight bowed his head with a smile. "Then I shall begin," he said quietly. "A tale of chivalry and destiny, of love and honor and the will of the gods." The candles flickered. The fire crackled. And in that warm inn on the edge of London, the first thread of a grand tapestry of stories was woven. Outside, the night lay still and moonlit. Horses slept in the stables, their breath rising in clouds. Beyond the city walls stretched the open road, long, winding, and full of promise. When dawn came, the bells of London rang softly through the mist. The pilgrims mounted their horses, the chill air filled with birdsong and the scent of new morning. The host rode at the front, cheerful and commanding. "Good friends," he called, "keep your word. Let no man grow dull. The night shall begin our fellowship with a tale to stir the soul." And so, with laughter and eager hearts, the company set forth. Hooves clattered on cobblestones, sunlight broke through the mist, and the road to Canterbury unfurled before them, a road that would soon echo with tales of love and lust, faith and folly, nobility and sin. For though each pilgrim rode toward a holy shrine, it would be their stories, not their prayers, that would grant them immortality. And thus began the Canterbury Tales, a journey not just across England, but across the vast landscape of the human soul. When dawn broke over the English fields and laughter filled the crisp morning air, the host turned in his saddle and called out to the travelers. "Now, noble knight," he said with cheer, "you drew the shortest straw, so the honor is yours. Begin our journey with a tale worthy of your chivalry." The knight bowed slightly, his armor glinting in the rising light. "Gladly, good host," he replied. "Since I am the first to speak, I shall tell a tale of ancient days, of valor and love, of fate and fortune, and of men who fought bravely, though the heavens conspired against them. Long ago, when God still walked among men, there lived a mighty ruler named Theseus, Duke of Athens, conqueror of realms and protector of justice. His fame stretched far and wide, sung by bards in every kingdom. After long years of war, Theseus returned home in triumph, his army marching through the golden gates of Athens. Yet his victory was interrupted by a sorrowful sight, a group of weeping women dressed in black, kneeling by the roadside. They cried out in anguish, "O noble Duke, we are widows of Thebes. The cruel tyrant Creon has slain our husbands and refuses to bury their bodies. Their souls wander unblessed, denied the peace of the grave." Theseus's heart filled with righteous fury. "No man shall deny the dead their rest," he declared. Without hesitation, he rode forth to Thebes with his army. The battle was fierce and swift. Creon fell, Thebes was freed, and the widow's prayers were answered. Among the ruins, however, 2 noble knights were found lying wounded, Palamon and Archite, nephews of Creon and prisoners of war. Though Theseus admired their valor, he ordered them imprisoned in Athens in a tower of marble. For many years they languished in that high chamber, seeing nothing but the sky and the palace gardens below. One morning, as the light streamed through the narrow window, fate turned its wheel. Below them walked a maiden of radiant beauty, Emily, sister to the Duchess, her hair golden as the dawn and her gown shimmering like spring flowers. Palamon gazed at her and felt his heart strike like lightning. "Oh, holy Venus," he whispered, "what vision is this? She is no mortal. She is an angel." Archite looked as well, and love pierced him just as deep. "By Mars, the god of war," he murmured, "she shall be my lady and my life." Thus 2 sworn brothers became rivals, divided by love for a woman neither had ever spoken to. Years passed. One day, through the mercy of a noble friend, Archite was released but under exile. He was free to walk the world, but if he ever set foot in Athens again, death would be his punishment. Palamon, trapped behind cold stone, cried out, "O cruel fortune, He walks free, yet cannot see her. I am near her, yet bound by chains. Both suffered equally, each cursing fate in his own cage of longing. But love does not rest. Arcite could not forget Emily. Wandering the wild forests, he grew thin and sorrowful, until at last he returned to Athens in disguise. Calling himself Philostrate, he served in Emily's household, a humble knight hidden behind the mask of a servant. Meanwhile, Palamon, driven by desperation, escaped his prison by night and fled into the woods, where fate, mischievous as ever, reunited him with Arcite. When they met, Palamon's voice trembled with anger. "False friend," he cried, "you betrayed your oath of brotherhood. You live in disguise, serving the lady you once swore to love in honor. One of us must die for her this day." Arcite's eyes flared. "So be it," he replied. "Tomorrow at sunrise we meet here armed and let the gods decide." At dawn, beneath the towering oaks, they fought fiercely, armor clashing, swords flashing in the morning light. They were equals in strength and courage, two noble hearts torn by the same love. But before one could claim victory, Duke Theseus, out hunting nearby, came upon them. His voice thundered across the clearing. "Stop! What madness drives this?" When he learned who they were and why they fought, Theseus, though angered, was moved. "You are both noble men," he declared. "Let justice be done in honor, not secrecy. You shall return to Athens, and in 1 year's time you shall meet again, in a grand tournament. Each of you will bring 100 knights. The victor shall win Emily's hand." A year passed, and Athens prepared for the spectacle. Great stands were built, banners flew high, and trumpets rang across the plain. Palamon entered clad in white, symbol of hope and devotion. Arcite, his rival, rode in black, the color of determination and fate. Between them sat Emilie, serene yet sorrowful, praying to the gods for peace. The tournament began with thunderous cries. Spears shattered, swords clanged, and dust filled the air. Both men fought like lions, neither willing to yield. Then at last Arcite struck Palamon down. The crowd erupted in cheers, and the victory was his. But fate had one more twist. As Arcite lifted his visor to salute Emily, his horse reared violently. The earth shook, and he was thrown, crushed beneath his saddle. The gods, jealous and cruel, had claimed their price. On his deathbed, Arcite called for Palamon and Emily. "Cousin," he whispered weakly, "forgive me. We were brothers once, divided by pride. Take her hand and love her truly. I die content knowing she will be yours." Turning to Emily, he said, "Remember me kindly and be happy." With those words, he breathed his last. The city mourned him deeply. His funeral was grand and solemn, with garlands of flowers and armor laid upon his pyre. Emily wept bitterly, and even Palamon could not hold back his tears. Time, however, softened sorrow into peace. By Theseus's decree, Palamon and Emily were wed, uniting love, honor, and destiny. Their union was both joy and remembrance, a tribute to Arcite, who had loved and lost so nobly. When the night's tale ended, silence fell among the pilgrims. The host finally spoke. "By my troth, Sir Knight, your story is noble, full of wisdom and truth." The miller chuckled. "Aye," he said, "but wait till you hear mine, not so noble yet full of fun." Laughter rippled through the group, and the road to Canterbury stretched ahead, golden in the sunlight. Yet in that moment, as the sound of hooves echoed softly, many still saw in their minds the image of two knights, once brothers, now immortal in love and legend, their fates forever entwined beneath the watching eyes of the gods. The morning sun rose higher over the fields as the pilgrims rode on. After the noble knight's tragic tale of love and destiny, the air felt solemn, until the miller, red-faced from ale and brimming with mischief, suddenly urged his horse forward. "By God's bones," he shouted with a grin, "I'll tell a story that will make you laugh. No lords or ladies this time, just plain folk and their foolishness." The reeve scowled in disapproval. "You're drunk, Miller," he said sharply. "Your tongue will shame us all." But Miller only laughed louder. "Then cover your ears, old man," he jeered, "for the truth will not wait for your dignity." The other pilgrims chuckled, and even the host smiled. "Let him speak," he said. "We've heard enough of noble hearts. Now let's hear of common ones." Miller tipped his head, took a deep drink from his flask, and began. In the town of Oxford, there once lived a rich old carpenter named John. He was a simple, hard-working man, proud of his home and even prouder of his young wife, Alisoun. She was a bright, lively girl, fair-skinned, with eyes like wildflowers and laughter that rang like silver bells. She was as spirited as she was beautiful, and though John adored her, he also feared losing her. Jealousy made him foolish. He watched her closely, guarding her as if she were gold-locked in a chest. Living in the same house was a clever young scholar named Nicholas, a student of astrology. He was quiet and polite, but behind his bookish manners hid a mischievous heart. From the first moment he saw Alisoun, he desired her deeply. He watched her smile, her walk, her laughter, and knew he would risk anything to win her love. One Sunday, when her husband was away, Nicholas found Alisoun alone. "Sweet Alisoun," he whispered softly, "you are the fairest creature in all of Oxford. Grant me your love, or I shall surely die." Alisoun laughed, pretending to ignore him, but his persistence wore her down. When he caught her hands and kissed her suddenly, she blushed and pushed him away, but only half-heartedly. "Hush now," she said at last, glancing toward the door. "If my husband ever finds out, he'll kill us both, but perhaps we can find a way." From that moment, their secret affair began. Now in the same town lived a man named Absalom, a parish clerk with curly golden hair and a fancy taste for perfume and song. He was a foolish romantic who fancied himself irresistible to women. He sang under their windows, sent small gifts, and never missed a chance to show off his fine clothes. When he saw Alisoun at church one morning, his heart was lost. He sighed and sent her gloves, a silver coin, and even a piece of holy bread, all of which she accepted with laughter but no love. She told Nicholas of the clerk's foolish wooing, and Nicholas laughed. "Let him dream," he said. "The fool's love will make our nights even sweeter." After some time, Nicholas devised a cunning plan to spend a night with Alisoun without fear of discovery. One day he locked himself in his room, pretending to have gone mad or possessed by spirits. When the carpenter broke down the door in worry, Nicholas stared into the air as if in a trance. "Oh, John," he said in a trembling voice, "the stars speak of doom. A great flood is coming, greater than Noah's. Within 2 nights the world shall drown. Only those who prepare shall live." The old carpenter trembled in fear. "What must we do?" he cried. Nicholas replied solemnly, "We must build 3 large tubs, one for each of us. We will hang them from the roof and fill them with food and ale. When the flood comes, we'll float safely above the waters." The carpenter believed every word. Together they built the tubs, tied them to the rafters, and prepared for the supposed flood. That night, when the carpenter climbed into his tub and began to pray, Nicholas and Alisoun slipped quietly down the ladder, laughing in whispers, and lay together in John's own bed. Meanwhile, Absalom, the lovesick clerk, wandered through the night with his guitar singing beneath Alisoun's window. "Sweet love, my darling," he called softly. "Grant me a kiss before I die of longing." Alisoun grinned and whispered to Nicholas, "Let's have some fun with him." She went to the window and said, "Keep quiet, dear Absalom, my husband is near. If you truly love me, come close and I'll give you a kiss, quickly and in the dark." Absalom's heart raced. He closed his eyes and leaned forward, only to find himself kissing something very far from her lips. Alisoun had turned around, and he received a full and unpleasant kiss upon her bare backside. The sound of his shocked cry sent Nicholas rolling with laughter. Absalom, humiliated and furious, stormed off vowing revenge. He ran to the blacksmith's forge, seized a red-hot poker, and returned to the window. "I've brought you a gift, my love," he said coldly. "One more kiss to seal our hearts forever." Nicholas, still laughing, decided to mock him again. "Aye then, here's one for you," he shouted, sticking his rear out the window. But this time Absalom struck with the poker, and Nicholas's howl of pain shook the house to its beams. Hearing the terrible cry, the carpenter awoke with a start. Believing the flood had begun, he panicked and cut the rope that held his tub. Down he crashed to the floor below, breaking his arm and shouting for mercy. The noise brought the neighbors running. They found John moaning on the ground, Nicholas howling from his burn, and Alisoun pretending to faint. "The flood! The flood!" Nicholas screamed, still in pain. But Alisoun shook her head and sighed, "Alas, my poor husband has gone mad." When the neighbors heard the tale of the tubs and the flood, they laughed until their sides ached. Poor John became the joke of all Oxford, and no one pitied him. Nicholas nursed his wound. Absalom swore off women for a while, and Alisoun, well, she only laughed and went about her days as gaily as before. As the miller finished his story, he slapped his knee and roared with laughter. "And that, my friends," he declared, "is how clever men make fools of themselves for love." The Pilgrims burst into laughter, though the reeve's face darkened with anger. "Mock my trade if you will, miller," he muttered, "but my tale will pay you back in kind." The company rode on, laughter fading into the clatter of hooves and the hum of the road. The sun sank slowly behind them, and the next storyteller prepared to speak. For in this pilgrimage, every soul had a story to tell, whether noble or foolish, holy or wicked, but always human. The morning sun hung softly over the winding road to Canterbury, as laughter drifted among the pilgrims. After so many tales of trickery and revenge, the host turned to the most outspoken traveller of all, the wife of Bath. She sat proudly on her horse, her red stockings gleaming in the light, her wide-brimmed hat shading eyes that glimmered with bold wit. There was something commanding about her, the confidence of a woman who had lived and loved many times. "I've had 5 husbands," she declared, "and if I could find a 6th worthy of me, I'd not say no. The pilgrims burst into laughter, but she smiled knowingly. You men talk of what women want, she continued, yet few of you truly understand it. So listen well. I'll tell you a story that reveals the truth of what women most desire. And with that, she began her tale. One set in the magical days of King Arthur's court, when knights roamed the land, and justice came not just from swords, but from wisdom. Long ago, in the time of Arthur and Guinevere, the realm was filled with enchantment. The forest shimmered with fairies, and honor ruled the hearts of knights. But even in those golden days, darkness sometimes crept into the hearts of men. Among the king's noble warriors was a young knight, strong and proud, but reckless with power. One day, overcome by lust and arrogance, he committed a terrible crime. He forced himself upon a maiden, shattering her honor and his own. When the crime reached the king's court, all expected a swift execution. Yet Queen Guinevere, filled with mercy and wisdom, stepped forward. "Let him live," she said, "but only if he can learn something no man truly knows. What is it that women most desire? Let him travel for a year and a day. If by then he finds the truth, he shall keep his life. If not, he dies." The knight bowed in shame and gratitude, swearing to discover the answer. Thus began his long and desperate quest. The knight journeyed far across the kingdom. In every town and village he asked the same question. What do women most desire? The answers were as varied as the faces he saw. One woman told him, "We want wealth." Another said, "We want beauty." A third whispered, "We want flattery." Others claimed, "We desire loyalty, or pleasure, or freedom." Everywhere he went, he was met with contradiction. No two women agreed. Some laughed at him, others scolded him, and a few pitied him. As the year passed, the knight grew weary and afraid. His time was nearly gone, and death waited at the end of his road. One cold winter evening he rode through a lonely forest. The wind whispered through the bare trees, and the world seemed empty, until he saw in a clearing ahead a circle of beautiful women dancing, their gowns gleaming like moonlight. Hope surged in his heart, but as he rode closer, the dancers vanished. And in their place stood a single old woman, bent and wrinkled. Leaning on a staff, "Good mother," said the knight. "Bowing low, I am doomed unless I can find what women most desire. Can you help me?" The old woman smiled, her face lined with wisdom. I can tell you," she said, "but only if you promise to grant me the first thing I shall ask of you, whatever it may be." The knight hesitated. Her eyes, though aged, gleamed with mystery. Yet his life was slipping away. "Very well," he said. "I give you my word." The woman nodded and whispered softly in his ear. The knight's eyes widened. Could it be true? He thanked her and galloped back to court, his heart racing with new hope. When the year and a day were done, the knight stood once more before Queen Guinevere and her ladies. The great hall was silent as he spoke. "My queen," he said, "I have learned that what women most desire is sovereignty, the right to rule their own lives, and mastery over their husbands and lovers." The hall erupted in murmurs. Some women nodded, others smiled knowingly. The queen raised her hand for silence and said, "You have spoken the truth. Your life is spared." But before the knight could breathe a sigh of relief, the old woman stepped forward. "My lady," she said to the queen, "I am the one who gave him this answer. He swore to grant me whatever I should ask. Now I ask this, let him take me for his wife." The knight's blood ran cold. "My wife?" he stammered. "You are old, poor, and lowborn. Take all my gold instead, but do not shame me with such a match." But the queen, bound by honor, declared, "A promise is a promise. You must keep your word." And so, before sunset, the young knight was married to the old woman. Their wedding was a somber affair. No music, no laughter, no joy. That night, when they lay together, the knight turned his face away, unable to bear the sight of her. "Why do you grieve so?" the old woman asked gently. "Because I am old and plain? Would you rather have a young and beautiful wife who might betray you? Or one who is loyal and true, though she is poor and aged?" The knight said nothing. His pride wrestled with his heart. "Then tell me this," she continued. "If you had to choose, would you have me old and faithful or young and false?" He thought long and deeply. At last he whispered, "My lady, I leave the choice to you. Whatever pleases you shall please me." A smile spread across her wrinkled face. "You have given me mastery, the very thing women desire most. Because you have granted me that, I will be both young and faithful." Before his eyes, her form began to change. Her wrinkles smoothed, her hair shone gold, her eyes brightened like dawn. In moments, the old crone was gone, and in her place stood a woman of breathtaking beauty and grace. The knight could only stare in wonder. They lived happily from that day forth in love, respect, and peace. When the wife of Bath finished her tale, the pilgrims clapped and laughed. Some of the men looked uneasy, while the women smiled with quiet satisfaction. The host laughed loudest of all. "By God's bones, madam, you've spoken truth more sharp than any sword." The wife of Bath winked. "Aye," she said, "give us the power, and we'll give you the love." The road to Canterbury echoed again with laughter and debate, for in every tale they found a mirror of themselves. And as they rode on, the pilgrims knew one truth above all, that every story, whether comic or noble, carried a piece of the human heart. The afternoon sun sank low over the dusty road to Canterbury. The laughter of earlier stories had quieted, and the pilgrims rode in a thoughtful hush. The host, eager for another tale, turned toward the partner, a thin man with long, greasy yellow hair, pale skin, and eyes that glimmered with a strange mixture of charm and deceit. Around his neck hung a bag of so-called holy relics, pig bones, glass beads, and tattered cloth, which he claimed were blessed objects capable of curing sin. He made his living selling false pardons and fake salvation to the gullible. "Come, partner," said the host, "tell us something fitting. You preach against sin every Sunday. Let's hear one of your holy tales." As they neared the edge of the forest, Chanticleer, terrified but quick-thinking, said in a choked voice, "Good sir, you are clever indeed. Surely those who chase us will speak of your great wisdom and cunning. Why not tell them of your triumph? Let the world know of Reynard's glory." The fox, swollen with pride, opened his mouth to boast. And in that instant, Chanticleer broke free, fluttering up into the branches of a tall tree. Reynard stopped and glared up at him. "Come down, good Chanticleer," he said smoothly. "I meant no harm. Let us be friends. You misjudged me." But Chanticleer, safe in the branches, shook his head. "No, Reynard," he said. "You tricked me once with flattery, but never again. From now on, I will trust deeds, not words." The fox realized he had been defeated by his own vanity and slunk away into the shadows, his tail low and his pride wounded. When the nun's priest finished his tale, the pilgrims clapped and laughed. The host grinned broadly. "Well told, father. That's a fine lesson wrapped in good humor. Pride and flattery. They've undone many a fool." The priest bowed modestly. "Indeed," he said. "Let this be remembered. A honeyed tongue can be sharper than a blade. And those who love their own voices too much often sing themselves into danger." The company rode on, smiling and thoughtful, their laughter echoing through the fields. And though the sun was bright and the road cheerful, each pilgrim carried in their heart the image of a golden rooster and a sly red fox, and the warning that even the proudest can fall to a flattering lie. The sun was beginning to dip, low over the English countryside as the pilgrims rode on. The air was soft with evening light, and the mood among them had turned peaceful. The Franklin, a wealthy landowner with a cheerful face and a love for good company, cleared his throat. "Friends," he said kindly, "you've heard tales of knights and tricksters, of pride and punishment, but let me offer something different, a story of love, patience, and honor. For true gentility lies not in noble birth, but in a noble heart." The group nodded, and the Franklin began his tale. Long ago in Brittany, there lived a brave and noble knight named Arviragus. Though proud in battle, he was gentle in spirit, and above all things, he loved a beautiful lady named Dorigen. She was fair, wise, and kind, admired by all who saw her, but she returned Arviragus's love with equal devotion. When he asked for her hand, she agreed, but only under one condition. "I will marry you," she said, "if you promise that though I shall be your wife, you will treat me always as your equal, not as one bound in service, but as a true companion." Arviragus smiled and gave his word. "My lady," he said, "there is no greater honor than to love you as my equal. Between us there shall be no tyranny, only trust." And so they were married, and for a time their life together was one of perfect joy. They lived in peace and laughter, walking hand in hand through their garden by the sea, their hearts united by loyalty and tenderness. But happiness is never free from trials. Soon after their marriage, Arviragus was called away to England to serve his king and win honor in battle. Though Dorigen encouraged him to go, her heart grew heavy the moment he left. Each day she walked alone by the cliffs overlooking the stormy sea, her eyes searching the horizon for his ship. The jagged black rocks below terrified her, cruel stones that had wrecked many vessels and taken countless lives. "If ever he returns," she whispered, "may the sea be kind and the rocks stay buried beneath the waves." Her friends tried to comfort her, inviting her to feasts and dances, but Dorigen's thoughts were always far away. She smiled out of courtesy, but her heart was restless and full of fear. One day, while attending a spring festival, she met a young squire named Aurelius. He was handsome, noble-born, and gentle in speech, but above all he was hopelessly in love with Dorigen. He had admired her from afar for years, and now seeing her without her husband, his heart could not remain silent. He approached her humbly. "Lady Dorigen," he said, "I have no right to speak, but I cannot hide my feelings any longer. You are the light of my life. If you cannot love me, I shall die." Dorigen looked at him kindly but firmly. "Sir Aurelius," she said, "you must not speak so. I am a faithful wife. I love only my husband." Yet perhaps wishing to end his pleading, she added lightly, "Still, if you can perform an impossible task, then perhaps I would consider your love. If you can make every rock along this coast vanish, every deadly stone from Dover to Brittany, then you may have my heart." Aurelius sighed deeply, knowing the task was hopeless. "My lady," he said, "you have set me an impossible challenge, yet your words shall be my life's quest." For 2 years Aurelius suffered in silence, his heart sick with unfulfilled love. He prayed, fasted, and even visited scholars and magicians hoping for some miracle. At last, one day, he found a clever clerk of Orleans, a master of the hidden arts. The clerk agreed to help him as for a great price. Using his charts, mirrors, and strange calculations, he created a powerful illusion. For 2 days and nights, it seemed that the tide had risen so high that every rock along the coast had disappeared beneath the sea. Aurelius was overjoyed. He rushed to Dorigen's house and fell to his knees. "My lady," he cried, "behold, the rocks are gone. I have done as you asked. Now fulfill your promise." Dorigen was struck speechless. Through her window, she saw only smooth waves stretching to the horizon. Her heart trembled. She had spoken in jest, but now her words had returned to bind her like iron. That night she wept bitterly. "What shall I do?" she cried. "If I keep my word, I betray my husband. If I break it, I dishonor my name." For 2 days she could neither eat nor sleep. When Arviragus returned home soon after, she confessed everything through tears. She told him of her foolish words, Aurelius's devotion, and the terrible choice before her. Arviragus listened silently, his face pale but calm. When she finished, he took her hands and said gently, "My dearest wife, you have done no evil. You gave your word in innocence, not in lust. Yet a promise is a sacred thing. You must keep it, whatever the cost. I would rather suffer shame than see your honor stained." Dorigen could hardly bear his kindness, but she obeyed. The next morning she went to Aurelius, her heart breaking. "Sir," she said softly, "my husband knows all. He has commanded me to keep my word. Therefore I come to you." Aurelius looked at her, astonished. Her sorrow and loyalty pierced his soul. "Lady," he said, "God forbid I take advantage of such virtue. You have shown more honor than any living woman, and your husband more than any knight. I release you from your promise. Go, and may heaven bless you both." With tears in her eyes, Dorigen thanked him and returned home to Arviragus. Their love made stronger by mercy and truth. When Aurelius went to pay the magician his fee, 1,000 pounds of gold, he told him all that had happened. The magician smiled quietly. "Sir Aurelius," he said, "you have behaved with honor as has the lady and her husband. Therefore I shall not take your gold. The truest magic is a noble heart." And so all three, the knight, the lady, and the squire, kept their honor. None was stained by deceit, though all had been tested by fate. When the franklin ended his tale, the pilgrims were silent for a moment, moved by the gentleness of his story. Then the host clapped his hands and said warmly, "By my faith, that was a noble tale. May every man love as loyally, and every woman keep her honor so well." The franklin smiled modestly. "Thank you, friends," he said, "for what is nobility without kindness or love without truth? These are the true marks of a gentle heart." And with that the company rode on toward Canterbury, their hearts lightened by a tale of virtue triumphant. A reminder that true gentleness comes not from birth or rank, but from the courage to choose what is right. As the pilgrims neared the end of another long day's ride, a gentle quietness settled over the group. The franklin's tale of honor and love still lingered in their minds, and for a while no one spoke. Then the host turned to the clerk, a thoughtful scholar from Oxford, who had ridden silently for most of the journey. "Sir Clerk," said the host cheerfully, "you've been silent long enough. You sit there deep in thought, as though your head were filled with Latin verses. Tell us something from your learning, a tale that teaches but also touches the heart." The clerk smiled modestly. "Indeed, good host," he replied. "I will tell you a story I learned from an Italian poet named Petrarch. It is the tale of a woman's patience and faith, a tale of the trials of the Lady Griselda. In a quiet valley of Saluzzo in northern Italy, there once ruled a noble marquis named Walter. He was young, handsome, and admired by all for his courage and wisdom. But though his people loved him dearly, they often worried that he remained unmarried, for without a wife or heir, their future seemed uncertain. One day the elders of his court approached him. "My lord," they said respectfully, "we fear for the safety of your lands. Take a wife so that your name and lineage may endure." Walter listened and agreed. "You are right," he said. "I shall marry." But I will choose my wife myself, and whoever she is, highborn or humble, you shall honor her as your lady, just as I will." The people bowed and gave their promise, and Walter began to search for a woman worthy of both love and faith. Near his castle lived a poor but virtuous man named Janicula, who had one daughter, Griselda. Though she was simple in dress and gentle in manner, she possessed a rare beauty and a pure heart. She tended her father's sheep, fetched water from the well, and cared for their small home with quiet grace. One morning, as Walter rode through the valley, he saw Griselda carrying a jug of water. Her face was serene, her eyes bright with kindness. The Marquis stopped his horse and watched her in wonder. Though she wore humble clothes, she seemed to him more noble than any lady of the court. That very day he made his decision. He would marry Griselda. The next morning, Walter sent for Janicula and his daughter. They came trembling to the castle, for they could not imagine what the great lord wanted with them. Walter looked kindly upon Griselda and said, "Good maiden, I wish to make you my wife, if you will agree to obey me in all things, without question or complaint." Griselda, humble and amazed, bowed her head. "My lord," she said softly, "I am not worthy of such honor, but if it please you, I will obey you in all things with my heart and soul." And so, before the astonished people of Saluzzo, Walter married Griselda in a grand ceremony. Her rags were replaced by silks and jewels, and though she had been poor that morning, by nightfall she was a marquise. Yet she remained as gentle and humble as ever, treating all with kindness and grace. The people loved her deeply, and soon she bore a beautiful daughter. For a time all was happiness. But Walter, ever curious of the human heart, began to test Griselda's obedience. He wanted to know if her love for him was truly unconditional, though the thought itself was cruel. One day he came to her with a grave expression. "My people murmur against you," he said. "They say you are unworthy to bear my child. I must send the baby away." Griselda's heart broke within her, but she bowed her head. "My lord," she whispered, "you are my husband and I am yours. Do as you think best." Walter secretly gave the child to a trusted servant, who carried her to Bologna to be raised in secret. But Griselda believed her daughter dead. Her sorrow was deep, yet she did not reproach her husband. Instead, she prayed for the child's soul and continued to serve Walter faithfully. Years passed and she bore a son. Once again, Walter decided to test her. He came to her one night, his eyes cold and distant. "The people still grumble," he said. "They say our marriage was a mistake, and that your son should not inherit after me. I must send him away too." Tears filled Griselda's eyes, but she answered gently, "My lord, my heart is yours to break or heal. Do as you must." Walter sent the boy away to Bologna, where his sister was already growing in secret. Still, Griselda did not waver in her loyalty or love. Many years later, when both children had grown, Walter prepared his final and cruelest test. He told Griselda that the Pope had granted him permission to annul their marriage so that he might wed a woman of higher birth. He ordered her to leave the castle and return to her father's cottage, stripped of her fine clothes and jewels. Griselda obeyed silently. She removed her silk gown, donned her old peasant dress, and walked barefoot through the village, her head bowed, her heart heavy but unbroken. Her only wish was that Walter might find happiness, even without her. Months later, Walter sent for her again. "Griselda," he said, "I am to marry another, and I would have you prepare the castle for my new bride." Though the command pierced her soul, she bowed and answered, "Yes, my lord." And so, she cleaned and decorated the halls, setting out feasts and flowers for the wedding day, her hands steady even as her heart trembled. When the wedding guests arrived, Walter presented a beautiful young woman and a fine young man, Griselda's own children, though she did not recognize them. Then, as all watched in silence, Walter turned to her and said, "Griselda, this is the lady I have chosen to wed. Tell me, what think you of her?" Griselda looked at the young woman with tears in her eyes. "My lord," she said softly, "she is fair and worthy. May you both find joy together." Walter's heart finally broke. He could bear it no longer. "Griselda," he cried, "my faithful wife, it is enough. These are your children, alive and well. Forgive me, my love. I have tested you beyond reason, and you have never failed me." For a long moment, Griselda said nothing. Then she fell to her knees, not in anger, but in gratitude that her children lived. "My lord," she said, "you are my husband and I am your servant. If I have passed your tests, then I thank God, not myself." Walter embraced her, and the people wept for joy. He restored her to her rightful place as his wife and queen, and the years that followed were filled with peace and love. Never again did Walter test her heart, for he had learned at last that true virtue needs no trial. When the clerk finished his tale, the pilgrims were silent. Even the host, usually loud and merry, wiped his eyes. "By St. Mary," he said, "that was a tale to make a man humble. Such patience no mortal woman could bear." The clerk smiled. "Perhaps," he said softly. But let us remember Griselda not for her obedience alone, but for her faith, her calm strength in the face of sorrow. She teaches that love and patience, though often tested, are stronger than pride or power. And with that the pilgrims rode on, and each lost in thought, each quietly wondering what they themselves might endure for love. As the pilgrims continued their journey toward Canterbury, laughter, debate, and teasing filled the road. Each tale brought new amusement and new tension among the travelers. Among them were two men who could never see eye to eye, the summoner and the friar. Both worked for the church, yet both were known for their corruption. The friar, cheerful and persuasive, was a man who collected donations in exchange for blessings and prayers. The summoner, rough and cunning, was an official who called sinners to church court. Though he often used his power to extort bribes, it was inevitable that these two would clash. When it came time for the friar to tell his tale, he looked at the summoner with a sly grin. "I'll tell a story," he said, "about a summoner, one much like our good friend here." The group chuckled, and the summoner crossed his arms in silent fury. Already planning his revenge, the friar began his tale. Once, there was a summoner who worked under an archdeacon in a small English town. Outwardly, he appeared to be a man of holy purpose, but in truth he was one of the most corrupt men alive. He took bribes from guilty men and accused innocent people simply to fill his pockets. He surrounded himself with thieves, pimps, and other criminals. One day, as this wicked summoner rode down a quiet country road, he met a mysterious man dressed entirely in black, riding a dark horse. The stranger's eyes gleamed strangely, and his voice carried a chilling calm. "Good day, sir," the summoner said, trying to sound friendly. "Where are you bound?" "Wherever I am needed," the man replied. "And you?" "I go to collect what's owed to the church," said the summoner proudly. The stranger nodded. "Ah, then we are brothers in trade. I too am a collector," the summoner laughed. "Then let us ride together and see what fortune we may find." As they traveled, they came across a poor old widow walking beside the road. The summoner stopped her and demanded payment for an old fine that no longer existed. When she begged him for mercy, he cursed her and threatened to have her dragged to court. Trembling, the widow raised her hands to heaven and cried, "God curse the man who wrongs me." At that moment, the stranger turned to the summoner and said, in a voice that echoed like thunder, "Her curse is granted." The summoner stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" The stranger's eyes flared red. "I mean," he said, "that I am no man. I am a fiend from hell, and I take the souls of those who live in sin, men like you." The summoner fell to his knees. "No, I serve the church." The fiend sneered. "You serve yourself. You lie, cheat, and steal in God's name. You are mine." Before the summoner could cry out again, the earth split open, and the devil dragged him screaming into the flames below. When the friar finished, the pilgrims erupted with laughter and applause. "A fitting end," cried the host. "That's what comes to false churchmen." But the summoner was furious. His face burned red and his fists clenched tightly around his reins. "Fine," he growled. "You've had your laugh, friar. Now I'll tell my tale, and we'll see how holy your kind truly are." Once, the summoner began, his tone dripping with sarcasm. There was a greedy friar who traveled from house to house collecting coins for his order. He promised prayers and blessings in exchange for money, claiming his holy words could free souls from purgatory. But in truth, his only goal was to fill his purse and his belly. One day, this friar visited the home of a wealthy old man who was very sick. The friar greeted him with exaggerated kindness. "Good sir," he said, "I have prayed for your health and for your wife's soul. Surely you will grant a small offering to our order." The old man sighed. "I have given so much already." "I have nothing left," the friar frowned. "Nothing left? Not even a single coin to save your soul from torment?" The old man groaned and said, "Well, I do have something for you, but you must promise to share it fairly with your brothers." "Of course," said the friar eagerly. "I swear it." "Then reach behind me," said the man weakly, "and take it." The friar leaned forward, and the man released a loud burst of gas that echoed through the room. The friar jumped back in shock, his face twisted with disgust as laughter erupted from the household. "How dare you mock me?" he shouted. The old man chuckled. "I gave you exactly what you asked for, something to share with your brothers." The pilgrims burst into laughter so hard that some nearly fell from their horses. Even the host had tears in his eyes. "By St. Thomas," he said, "that's the finest jest I've ever heard." The friar tried to protest, but the noise drowned him out. At last he too began to laugh, realizing that in their battle of words neither man had truly won. Both tales revealed the same truth, that corruption and greed were everywhere, even among those who claimed to be holy. And so, with laughter still echoing down the road, the pilgrims rode on, wiser and lighter in spirit, reminded that a good story could expose even the darkest of sins with humor and truth. As the sun dipped low on the horizon and the spires of Canterbury began to gleam in the distance, A hush fell over the group of weary travelers. For days they had shared the road, their laughter and arguments echoing through the countryside. They had told stories of love and sin, of courage and deceit, of faith and foolishness. Each tale had revealed something about its teller, their hopes, their flaws, their beliefs. And now at last, the end of their journey was near. The host, Harry Bailey, who had guided them with cheer and good humor, looked back over his shoulder and smiled. "Friends," he called out, "we have told many fine tales, enough to fill a lifetime. Soon we shall stand before the shrine of St. Thomas and offer our prayers. But before we part, who among us will give the final story? A tale to close our pilgrimage with wisdom and grace." The pilgrims looked at one another, some smiling, some lost in thought. The knight, noble and gentle, bowed his head respectfully. The miller, who had told his bawdy tale early on, stifled a laugh. The wife of Bath, bold as ever, adjusted her scarf and winked. Yet it was the quiet parson who stepped forward at last, his face calm and kind. "If it please you all," he said softly, "I will tell no fable nor tale of jest. For at journey's end it is time for truth. Let us speak not of worldly deeds, but of salvation and repentance." The company nodded in agreement, sensing the solemn weight of his words. The laughter faded, replaced by reverent silence. The parson began his sermon-like tale not with laughter, but with deep sincerity. He spoke of the dangers of sin, of pride, envy, wrath, sloth, greed, gluttony, and lust, the 7 deadly roots from which all evil grows. He reminded his fellow pilgrims that no soul, no matter how lowly or proud, could find peace without repentance. The road to Canterbury, he said, is not only a path through the fields of England, but a symbol of the greater pilgrimage we all take, the journey of life itself. And at its end lies not a shrine of gold, but the eternal judgment of God. His voice, though quiet, carried power. Even the most mischievous pilgrims listened intently. The pardoner, who had sold false relics for profit, lowered his gaze in shame. The summoner, once so quick to mock others, fell silent. The wife of Bath smiled faintly, as if recalling the long road of her own life and its many lessons. The parson spoke of mercy and forgiveness, how true penance was not in empty rituals, but in a heart that turns honestly toward goodness. He urged them to live humbly, to seek grace, and to remember that all men and women, no matter their station, are equal before God. When he finished, the group rode on in thoughtful silence. The city of Canterbury loomed nearer, its bells tolling faintly through the cool evening air. The pilgrims' laughter had faded into quiet reflection, and the road that had once been filled with stories now seemed almost sacred. As they reached the great cathedral, the host raised his hand. "Here we are, good friends, at the end of our pilgrimage." The travelers dismounted, some crossing themselves, others gazing up at the tall spires that reached toward the heavens. Inside, candles flickered beside the shrine of St. Thomas Becket, casting golden light across the marble floor. Each pilgrim knelt in turn at the knight. The miller, the clerk, the wife, the parson, and all the rest, each whispering prayers for forgiveness, for peace, or for those they had left behind. When their prayers were done, they rose slowly and looked upon one another with new eyes. The journey had changed them. What had begun as a contest of tales had become a reflection of their very souls. They had discovered that the true purpose of the road was not only to reach Canterbury, but to find understanding within themselves. As they prepared to part ways, the host smiled warmly. "Each of us will return home with stories to tell," he said. "But may we remember that laughter and sorrow, sin and virtue, all are part of the same journey. And though the road ends here, our greater pilgrimage continues." The pilgrims mounted their horses once more, their hearts lighter, their spirits touched by the sacredness of the moment. Behind them, the cathedral bells rang out over the rolling fields, echoing far and wide into song of faith, redemption, and the unending road of life. And so ended the Canterbury Tales, not with jest or rivalry, but with quiet truth, that every human soul, no matter how flawed, seeks the same destination, grace, forgiveness, and the hope of paradise beyond the road.